Just in case anybody needs a little happy. Can you say hi? Hey, can you say hi? Stop looking at her. Look at the friends. I know you can't see them. Look. Say hi to the friends. Say hi, friends. Sometimes you just need to see a little happy. Huh? Can you see yourself? Yes, it is my emotional support human. Say hi, friends. All right, I guess I'll give them back so we can get started. Bye, babe. I love you. We will be hanging out later. That'll be the best part of my day. I might be a little jaded, but he's super cute and he's such a good baby. And my daughter's a good mama, and I'm very happy about that. Although she did forget a bottle a couple of weeks ago, but we'll let that slide. All right, we'll go ahead and get started in just a second. I got something cool for you guys today. It's a little tool I've been using for various things in my world, and it has been super beneficial. And I just started using it for some stuff with the ENP study group. So it would be irresponsible if I didn't share the tool with you all as well. So we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining us today for what's technically week 8 for the On Scene First 2024 Winter and Spring ENP Study Group. Today, we're going to talk about emergency management and disruption of service. And I do have a disclaimer. I think it was the Friday after Thanksgiving. There was only about 5 of you that joined me on the live part, and I didn't send out the recording because somehow, some way, when I was transferring all of the slides from my old deck into this new deck, there was some sizing issues on one of the boxes that was on the screen, and a ton of the information got cut off. And I wasn't feeling my best, and I didn't feel like it was the best to send out as the recording. And so I need to redo it. So today is the day that I'm going to redo it so it gets on the recording, and it will tie in with the disruption of service. So if you were on for that first showing of it, feel free to stick around, or you can wait for the recording and kind of, fast forward. Do we fast forward anymore? Fast forward or move the little cursor thing to the section that you didn't get. But I did update those slides. What will not be in this one is the little pop quiz that I did in the last section, but I'm going to explain that in a couple of slides. So let me just get some of the logistics stuff out of the way. If you are finding this video on YouTube and you have not yet joined the study group to get access to all of the materials, the PDFs, some practice exams that will be coming out in the very near future, the MP3s of just the audio of the videos, and anything else, any, additional things that I offer to help study, and you are within the January 19th window of 2024, just go ahead and scan that QR code on the left, or go to onscenefirst.com/training/study ENP, and you can register there to get access to all of that stuff. If you are watching this video after January 19th and you are planning on taking the February or the April exam, or even the summer exam, and you want to get a head start on the materials, you can go to that same website there, same QR code, and there is a place for you to just request the information once the study group is over. The next live study group will be on March 8th in 2024. And then that will be the last one that I'm doing for the 2024 year. The next one will be in 2025, unless, I don't know, I'm looking for something extra to do and have another one, but that's tentatively the schedule. We have also partnered with Nina Ontario, and we will be solidifying a date where our friends from the north will be coming on to share some Canadian info as it pertains to the exam. If you want more information on what they're doing up there, go ahead and scan that QR code or head over to their website. Saying thank you to our premier study group sponsor, Rapid SOS. And as I say all the time, if you're not using their technology, shame on you. It's great technology and the basics are free and it's saving lots of lives. I'd shared a video this week, and it was a little bittersweet that it was 7 years ago that I left my 911 center to head over to Rapid SOS. And I have to say, my world is very different 7 years later this week than it was back then. So super appreciative and blessed for all the opportunities that I have had, including being here doing this with you guys. As far as the scholarships go, the date has passed. We are in the process of verifying that folks that did submit do not have the capability for their agency to pay for the exam for them. So if you are one of those folks that did put in for the application, just let your decision maker admin that you listed know that they should have received an email today that they need to check out and respond to. And as soon as they can do that, it would be appreciated, because we only have a small window to get the recipients picked and notified by next Friday. So I appreciate that. And we couldn't do those sponsorships if it wasn't for Rapid SOS, Responder Services Consulting, and LB Comms this year. So because of them, we are able to give out 7 scholarships. So wicked excited about that. And shameless plug for the On Scene First store. If you want to head over there for any swag, or I will be putting together a Telecommunicator Week package that should be very reasonably priced, where you can get your folks some of the stuff that you see there if you're interested for them for Telecommunicator Week. So I appreciate your support. And as you know, the majority, and I say the majority, some of the funding has to cover the cost of the item, but the majority of it goes back into 911 in some way or another. So I appreciate your support there as well. So here's the little tool that I want to share with you. Now, putting this website up here might get some folks all freaked out and panicked. I don't know what your opinion is about AI technologies. There are folks that are very receptive to it. There are some that are fearful of it. What I know is this website particularly has changed my life in more positive ways than I could have ever imagined. It is now my ADHD's best friend. Because if you think about it, sometimes we have a challenge just getting started on something, or, trying to figure out how to put something or how to word something or get ideas for whatever it is that you're doing. And this website has been super beneficial for that. But I'm not going to digress and go into a chat, an OpenAI chat educational session, but I do want to show you some ways that I am using it for this particular study group. And I think it could be very beneficial for you all as well. There's also an app that I'm using that's on my phone. So if I have to send an email from my phone and I want it to be cleaned up and made to look more professional or remove redundancy or emotion, I can just put it into the Chat GPT app. And it's a little white circle with some squirrely things on it. And if you want some more information on that, I'd be happy to give it to you. But I do think it's an amazing tool. And I just want to show you a couple of things. So every week, so I've had my presentations now for about 3 years. Every session, the week before the study group, I will go in, I will update them, I will refresh on the materials, come up with some ways to remember things if it seems like something challenging, and come up with something fun. So I have to do that every time I do the study group. I don't just create the things and just wing it when I come on. I probably put about 4 hours worth of work in every week during the study group. So this time has been no different. But as I was kind of using the chat, the OpenAI website this week, I thought it would be good to share with you. So this is just one of the things that I did as I am reading a definition or, trying to figure out a way to say something. This is basically what I put into the chat. So I just basically gave it a prompt and I said, explain this in simple terms. And so I used the definition: a central office to which a telephone end user is connected, the final central office before the end user's telephone, the central office trunking switching entity where telephone loops are terminated for purposes of interconnection to each other to the network. That's a lot of words. It's a lot, and my brain wasn't braining to the point where I could go, oh, okay, that's a simple explanation of it. So whenever my brain doesn't brain that way, I go over to my new best friend and I put in, explain this in simple terms, or provide an analogy for this particular thing. And I'm using it in several of my classes when I want to explain something that I'm having trouble thinking of a way to be creative and explain it. And so this is what it came up with. It says certainly in it. And when I say that it comes out in a millisecond, I mean a millisecond. Like, whoop, it's just there. I don't know who's back there or what they do, but it is wicked fast. So the Chat GPT response, it's like the last stop for a telephone before it gets to your house or where you work. This place connects your phone to the bigger phone network. It's where the wires from different phones all come together and link up so all the phones can talk to each other. That's it. So it takes a very complicated definition and it makes it simple. So Angie, you said you're working on loving it. I'll tell you, it is. I have been using it for so many different things. So this is just one thing that I wanted to show you that it does. Here is another thing that it does. And so a couple things. Number one, always be careful of the information that you're putting in there. If you're sending a sensitive email, obviously you're not going to put sensitive information in there. That's a no-brainer. But for something like this, it's extremely beneficial. So on the left side of the screen, all I did was copy one section of the body of knowledge. One little section, and I guess it was off center, but one little section, and the prompt I gave was fill in as much info as you can on each one of these topics. And I hit send, and this is what it does. Okay. It will literally just, when I say milliseconds, it's milliseconds. And then all of the information is right there in front of you. What I have also done is not right here. And so as I mentioned, I'll be sharing it is very cool, Laurel. And it's helpful, right? Instead of taking all this time to type in these things, and you always have to double check the information and make sure that it's giving you the right thing. But what I've also been doing is, so this is just one little example where I have taken the stuff on the left, asked it to put something on the right. What I'm going to show you on the next slide, it is not relevant to what you see on the screen right here, but it is something that I have done for a past session, that emergency management session, where I wanted to start creating some pretty cool or pretty thorough and appropriate practice exams. So imagine, if you will, I did it with the next slide, getting the information off of here. So when I asked it to define these things, what I did on the next one was, when I asked it to define mitigation, preparedness, recovery, and response, that information is on the screen there in front of me, right? So it's listed there on the right. I took screenshots of it. So it's listed there on the right. And then in the very next box, I gave it the command to create 5 multiple choice questions with the answers from the material or the previous material. So that's the prompt that I give it whenever I get some information like this. And this is what happens. So this is what I used in that last study session. Today we're doing 2 topics, so I won't have time to do this little pop quiz thing, but I will be sending it out with the materials from this week. And I think I had like 10 questions. But what it does is it spits out a multiple choice question and it gives you the answers. And so what I did is I moved it over here, made it a slide. So what key measures is implemented during the mitigation phase to ensure structures are resilient against potential hazards? And so the answer is B, but I have the answer. But then on the next page, I put the answer. So now it's going to be a quiz for you guys. So if you're not using this yet, there are so many things that you can use it for. And as you know, I'm all about sharing tools, sharing knowledge and education. And if you're interested in hearing some ways on how I've been helping some of the 911 centers that I've been working with, one, to help people better formulate emails that may be a little rough around the edges, or even writing outlines for training classes and examples for calls. One of the agencies I had showed them, I just spoke into the app and I said, write an outline for a 2-hour training on customer service and call handling in the 911 center. And as soon as I hit send, it came up with that outline almost immediately. And then you can ask it to expand on those topics. So it is not, it's not as scary as it is. It has just been something amazing. And Angie, be careful what you wish for, because I spent about an hour and a half on the phone with someone the other day who wants to start presenting at conferences, and they just wanted a little advice. And ironically, they took some notes and we popped it into the AI, and I have now started creating a class on how to create a class for a conference. So keep an eye out for that. So I know that it took a little bit. I hope this information was valuable. I just think it's really important to share these things with you, especially if it's going to help you to pass this test. So now let's get back into the topic at hand. A lot of the stuff in this section is going to be definitions. And so I will be reading the definitions when appropriate. I apologize for reading the screen. I will give you my added commentary as allows. But if you remember, it's not just the video with the slide presentation that folks utilize. They also utilize the MP3 that I provide in the Google Drive. So to accommodate those folks, reading of the slide it is. So as far as emergency management goes, you'll see in the body of knowledge, in the study manual, if you have it, that this is falling under the management like the operation side of the management piece. And it is because these things are things that have to kind of come from the top, right? So this is part of the leadership's responsibility when it comes to the emergency management things. So when we do a hazard analysis, there are going to be 3 areas that we will be focusing on. The first one is natural events, so any type of weather related event. Environmental events. Now, that's that power outage there, and maybe the power goes out because of a natural event, but it could also go out because of an environmental event, such as, overloading the system, or damage to one of the nodes, or one of the mechanical places. And then human caused events, and we're going to kind of break those down on the next slide, and that's the coffee spilling on the computer, but a little more dramatic, if you will. So the different types of disasters that could fall into each one of these categories is broken down into localized, which could be a weather event, severe weather that's coming through your area, such as a flood or tornado. A regional or national event, hurricanes, earthquakes, wildfires. These are things that may not just be localized, but they may affect a much larger area and cross over county and maybe even state lines. A PSAP only event, which could be a DDoS attack, arson, vandalism, or damage to something. And I mentioned this before, our generator during one of our pretty significant storms, when the power went out, the generator caught on fire, and there we have nothing, right? So that's PSAP only event. And then the network or transport facilities, such as telephone cable cut, loss isolation of the central office, which we're going to talk about a little bit later in this session. So there you go for those folks that need to see a picture of something like me. There are 4 phases of emergency management, and we're going to break down each one of these sections. The things that fall into each category will be listed out, and I'm going to say it now, and I will say it again, is that 2 of these categories may overlap. So mitigation and recovery may overlap, because as we're in the recovery phase, we may be actually building out things that will prevent issues in the future, right? So if we had a flooding and say the basement in one of the major facilities was flooded, in the recovery phase, we're going to fix that, we're going to clean that up, but then just as we would in the mitigation phase, how can we make sure that this doesn't happen again in the future? So the mitigation and the recovery phase, they may overlap, as it says there, and then I'll remind you again on another slide. But mitigation in general is all of the activities that are designed to limit the impact of future disasters, and we're going to break down what falls into each of these categories. The other thing that I want to say here is there is phases of emergency management on the exam. That I do know. And I think the little pop quiz that I'm going to share with you is kind of on track with how they ask the questions, like which phase is this, or this task would fall into which phase. So I do highly recommend that you spend some time studying on this, because this is kind of easy stuff to get down pat. And if there's 4 or 5 questions on it, that's 4 or 5 questions that you could very easily get right. So that's my theory. Preparedness is activities geared towards planning and preparing for the emergency. So mitigation is figuring out what we need to do. The preparedness is preparing what we learned in the mitigation phase. And then response is the activities that respond to the actual emergency, such as fire suppression and rescue, or service restoration. Now, service restoration could also come under recovery, but think about it this way. And again, I'll say this, I've said it before. Make sure you read the question carefully. Read the question carefully. Look for words that are indicating at what time in the process is this taking place. Number one. Number two, is there something else in the beginning of the sentence that indicates which phase in the process, right? And I'll just give you an example that I'm thinking of here is the electric company responds to a down power line. It temporarily hooks it back up. Well, that service restoration to get the service up and running, but the word temporarily is indicating that it's in the response period versus, fixing it for good. So just again, I think with this, it's really easy to get a little bit confused, but reading the question thoroughly is really important. And then making sure you try to identify by the sentence and then even by the answers what it might be looking for. Okay. And then the recovery is activities designed to restore service to its original level or better. So again, that definition is service restoration under response is going to be temporary, and then recovery is going to be to its original level of response or better. So breaking down mitigation a little bit further, as said, it involves the activities and measures to reduce or eliminate long-term risk to human life and property from natural or man-made disasters. The key activities that happen here is identifying and assessing potential risks and vulnerabilities. Okay, so that's folks are going to be going out, they're going to be assessing bridges and waterways and water tables, etc. It's also implementing policies and measures to reduce the impact of that disaster. And that could even be something like, at what point do we have a stay in place order, right? So I know here in Massachusetts, in some of the storms, our governor had, declared a state of emergency and put out a stay in place order. Like they didn't want any vehicles on the roads that didn't need to be on the road, the essential personnel, et cetera. Developing and enforcing building codes and land use planning. So that could be, I think of Florida, with hurricanes and where I grew up in Situate, Mass, it was right on the water. And so their building department may have certain criteria and building codes that have to accommodate your house not falling into the ocean, given a large weather event. And then land use planning could be utilizing different places in your jurisdiction for maybe FEMA trailers, or just knowing where you're going to have these things or be able to utilize land for certain things. Investing in infrastructure improvements and conducting public awareness campaigns to promote the risk reduction practices. So getting out there ahead of folks and letting them know what it is that they're supposed to be doing when. Implementation of building codes broken down. Government may enforce and update building codes to ensure structures are designed and constructed to withstand potential hazards such as earthquakes, floods, and hurricanes. I forgot that I had broken these down. Land use planning. Communities engage in effective land use planning to control and regulate land use to minimize disaster vulnerability. This may involve avoiding construction in high-risk areas or establishing buffer zones. The infrastructure improvements, this is what I kind of mentioned, knowing what is capable to happen in your area and making sure that your buildings and facilities can withstand those disasters. So that's investments that are made in critical infrastructure to enhance resilience against disasters. For example, constructing flood barriers, reinforcing bridges, and upgrading drainage systems. And then the public education and awareness. Mitigation efforts often include public campaigns to educate individuals and communities about potential risks, of the importance of preparedness. This may involve distributing information, materials, conducting workshops, and promoting community engagement, going into their council on aging centers, making sure that folks are well versed in where to go in the midst of an emergency. Then also under mitigation is hazard mapping and risk assessment. And that's identifying and mapping areas prone to specific hazards, helps assess the risk level. This information guides mitigation strategies and the resource allocation. So where are our resources going to be coming from? And then ecosystem management, preserving and restoring natural ecosystems can contribute to reducing the impact of certain disasters such as wildfires or flooding, wetlands, for instance, that act as a natural buffer against storm surges. So I know in certain parts of the country, they'll go out and they'll actually create wildfires and burn off the dead stuff under a controlled burn to prevent any type of major fire getting out of control and taking out a lot of places. So working on that type of mitigation. And then investing in early warning systems. I know a lot of places still have these kind of speakers up on top of, municipal buildings, et cetera. But it may not just be this type of system where we're utilizing social media a lot, utilizing apps and alert notifications on wireless devices, et cetera. But this is early warning systems is developing and implementing early warning systems for natural disasters, such as tsunami warning systems or tornado sirens, and they can provide communities with timely information to evacuate or take protective action. I will tell you, when I travel, if I ever heard a tornado siren, I would not know what to do. So I'm going to be calling them friends to tell me what to do. Insurance programs, encouraging and promoting insurance programs that provide coverage against specific hazards that can help individuals and businesses recover more efficiently after a disaster, reducing the overall economic impact, right? So working with insurance companies, they have a lot of information to give on how to mitigate needing to utilize their services. They'd rather you not have to use their services. So they're going to do their part to make sure that they're helping us. Community resilience programs. Also under mitigation, this is all stuff in advance of the major emergency. So building community resilience involves fostering strong social networks, enhancing local capacities, and promoting self-sufficiency, enabling communities to withstand and recover from disasters, putting some type of accountability in place, utilizing your council on aging centers, et cetera, to make sure they're aware of all of the shut-ins and folks that are on oxygen and that may need help, and they can kind of check in on each other versus overwhelming the emergency services. Research and development. Investing in research to better understand natural and man-made disasters and develop innovative technologies and solutions contributes to more effective mitigation strategies. That's learning about the things that could be taking place. I remember when they were, I'm just using this as an example, when we had to do all kinds of training on when folks were putting things in their vehicle. And as a first responder, when we walked up to the vehicle, we would, be trained on noticing the signs of whatever the chemical was in the vehicle, to be mindful and what it could potentially be. So anytime something new comes up that is happening, putting the time into educating yourself and researching is very important. And then under preparedness, focusing on the planning, training, and organizing resources to respond to and manage a disaster when it occurs effectively. So some of the key activities here are developing emergency plans and procedures, conducting training and drills for emergency response teams and the general public, establishing communication and coordination systems, stockpiling emergency supplies and resources, and creating public awareness campaigns to educate people on what to do before, during, and after the disaster. And so let's look and see what each one of these looks like. So the emergency planning is development and implementation of emergency plans that outline specific actions during a disaster. This includes evacuation plans, communication strategies, and coordination mechanisms. I have to laugh. I think it was I call it a mini documentary. It's really just TikTok, but mini documentary sounds much better. And somebody had asked, a question about kids my age being notified when school was canceled, and describe what it was like to sit there and watch, the television and the names going by. And of course you blink and you miss your school and you're not sure if it's on there, but we've come a long way with that technology. So the emergency planning and those notifications is really important. Training drills: conduct regular training sessions and drills to educate emergency responders, community members, and organizations on their roles and responsibility during a disaster. This ensures a coordinated and efficient response. An example here would be, encouraging community members to volunteer to be a part of opening a shelter, and being there to help in any type of emergency. Some agencies or some jurisdictions will have citizens academies where they will train folks to a minimum standard to be able to help in the midst of an emergency, whether it's, somebody who has a tree company, or is a trained chainsaw operator that can be trained to the standard of the jurisdiction, and they may be able to be utilized when trees need to be cut down, etc. Resource stockpiling: accumulating and maintaining necessary resources such as water, food, water, medical supplies, and equipment in strategic locations for rapid deployment during emergencies. The only downside to this is how long is it going to stay there, right? So a lot of folks do the stockpiling shortly before the event that is going to take place. Like when COVID hit, and apparently somebody put out there that we're going to have a toilet paper shortage, and then that was it, right? Like, blew my mind. Paper towels, cleaning supplies, absolutely. Toilet paper, didn't quite get that one, but okay, it happened. Establishment of emergency response teams: identifying and training individuals who will form emergency response teams, including first responders, medical personnel, and volunteers. This ensures a swift and organized response to the disaster. The picture that you see there on the bottom with all the ambulances and the fire truck and the police car, that was from a drill that we did in Freetown regarding the train that's going to be, or the commuter train that's going to be coming through their jurisdiction now. So we did exactly that. We trained, and we had some citizens there and some victims and other agencies that we might be working with. The communication systems, again, establishing and testing communication systems to facilitate effectively and timely information exchange during emergencies. This includes the public alert systems, two-way radios, and other communication tools. And during that particular drill, we learned that the radios in Freetown did not work very well in that area. As I was in the communication center, kind of observing and reporting on the duties and the activities of the dispatch center in the drill, we realized very quickly that they needed to work on getting some better communications there. So if we didn't do the drill, we wouldn't have known that that was the case. And then public education campaigns, conduct public awareness campaigns to educate individuals and communities about potential hazards, the importance of preparedness, and specific actions they should take during the disaster. And I just put the National Night Out up there. A lot of folks are not aware of National Night Out, or they may be aware of it. They just didn't get asked, as part of the communication center to be there. So if you know of a National Night Out in your area, get yourself a table, get yourself some swag and some literature, and get out there and educate the public, as well as social media. I when I was in the center, I had started our social media page. It's not there anymore, but the social media pages, they serve their purpose with public safety. And public education is, number one, building it, and number two, doing creative things to get folks to sign up for following you on social media. The development of evacuation plans, creating and practicing evacuation plans for areas that are prone to certain hazards, such as hurricanes, floods, wildfires. This includes identifying evacuation routes, the shelter locations, and transportation resources. When certain facilities have to be evacuated, nursing homes, hospitals, etc., there should be some type of transportation plan in place to be able to help with that. And then coordination of stakeholders, establishing partnerships and coordination mechanisms with local, regional, and national emergency management agencies, non-governmental organizations, and community groups. We always communicate with the local stores that are around us to find out what it is that they have for the ability to help us should we find ourselves in a situation where we don't have access to food, or need to feed a bunch of people in a very short period of time. So finding those resources as well. Any type of technology integrations should be done during the preparedness phase, incorporating technologies such as emergency notification apps, GIS mapping, and social media to enhance communication and coordination efforts during the emergency. And then crisis communication protocols. Develop protocols for effective communication with the media and the public during a crisis, involving providing accurate and timely information to prevent panic and confusion. Really important during any type of major incident. Make nice with the media before the major incident happens. Communicate with them. This is how we're going to roll. You can call us at this time, and we will have an update for you, or we will provide an email update with the situation at these times, and then stick to those times. There's nothing worse than the media calling in the middle of the emergency and you're getting your butt handed to you. They know you're getting your butt handed to you, and you're like, nope, got nothing to report at this time. So communicate that in advance. The communication systems, as mentioned, establishing and testing those communication systems to facilitate effective and timely information. And then this COOP thing, I do recall seeing this on my exam, the continuity of operations planning. The development, developing plans to ensure the continuity of essential services and operations for businesses and government agencies after the disaster. And then regular review and update of all of these plans, periodic review and update of the emergency plans and procedures to account for changes in the community, any technology or additional potential risks. And then under the response. So under the response is the immediate and coordinated effort to deal with the effects of a disaster to protect life and property. And the activities that we'll be diving into is activating the emergency response plans and teams, conducting search and rescue operations, providing emergency medical care and shelters when necessary, coordinating with local, regional, and national agencies as necessary, communicating timely and accurate information to the public, and then restoring essential services and infrastructure. And even in one of these things, when we talk about the communication, I think one of the most challenging things for a 911 center in the midst of a major disaster is telling people that they will not be responding once it gets past a certain point. And I think that's a huge piece of communication that may sometimes get missed. So that should be done in that preparedness stage, because if not, we'll be dealing with it in the response stage. As far as the activation of emergency plans go, emergency plans are activated to ensure a rapid and organized response to the disaster. It includes mobilizing response teams, implementing communications protocols, and coordinating resources. So I know in our area, if we were to have a major event and lots of people were coming into the town, we would utilize our Plymouth County Control and get on a group channel to make sure that everybody is on the same page. So that would be that communication protocol saying we're actually moving to, mutual aid channel 5, and then that way everybody is on the same page. The actual search and rescue operations is deploying trained search and rescue teams to locate and assist individuals that are trapped, injured, or in immediate danger. These operations aim to save lives and provide emergency medical care as necessary. The medical care and triage piece, establishing emergency medical facilities and providing immediate medical care to disaster survivors. Triage systems are often implemented to prioritize treatment based on the severity of the injuries. As we know, if there is no life, then they are not going to be able to be transported, or if they are pretty bad and there are others that could potentially be saved, and that becomes very challenging. Evacuation and sheltering. Coordinating the evacuation and affected populations to safe locations and setting up emergency shelters for those that have been displaced. We know that most folks don't want to leave their place unless they are absolutely made to. This includes providing essential services such as food, water, and medical care shelters. Also part of the response is evacuation and sheltering. Coordinating the evacuation of affected populations to safe locations and setting up emergency shelters for those displaced by the disaster. This includes providing essential services such as food, water, medical care at those shelters. And then communication and info sharing. Establishing communication systems to disseminate accurate and timely information to the public, emergency responders, and other stakeholders. This includes public warnings, updates, and instructions. And if you notice, each section is going to have very similar terminology where we're identifying what we need for communications. We are putting the mechanisms in place to make those communications. And then under response, we're implementing those communications. So while a lot of the information may sound redundant, again, it's at what stage, as you're reading the question that may pertain to that, it's what stage is it going to be, is it being utilized? Logistics and resource management, managing and mobilizing resources, including personnel, equipment, and supplies to support the response efforts. The logistics play a crucial role in ensuring the efficient distribution of resources to the affected areas. And then coordination with external agencies, collaborating with local, regional, national agencies, as well as non-governmental agencies and international partners when necessary to enhance the overall response capacity and resource availability. So you may not have things that is going to be needed and your neighboring agency does. So mutual aid agreements are a must. And then during the response phase is where firefighting and hazard mitigation is taking place. And again, the term mitigation is preventing further damage, right? Assessing and preventing further damage. So responding to and controlling fires, hazardous material spills, or other environmental threats resulting from the disaster. Firefighting efforts aim to prevent further damage and protect our communities. Public safety measures, implementing measures to ensure public safety, such as road closures, traffic management, and establishing safety zones. This helps prevent additional injuries and facilitates emergency response operations. And now that I think of it, I'm going to have to replace that picture with the one of my husband that ended up on social media when he had a fire truck parked across the road and a woman stopped and asked, "Is the road closed?" And his response is, "What do you think?" Probably not his finest moment, but he had been up for 3 days and was a little cranky, and he made his debut on social media. I might have to find that. And then response under the security and law enforcement, maintaining public order and security in the affected areas, preventing looting, and ensuring the safety of responders and survivors. Damage assessment. So this could be part of recovery as well. But again, as they're out there, they could also be assessing the damage. So damage assessment, conducting rapid assessment of the extent of damage to the infrastructure of the homes and critical facilities. This information guides resource allocation and prioritizes response efforts. So like I said, read the question, determine any other thing that might be identifiable in there, because some of the events may cross over into the other group. So yes, usually after the event, they're going to travel around and then they're going to identify what needs to be fixed. But it doesn't make sense if you are already out on the road as a responder in response mode to not be keeping track. And I'll tell you, in August, I got to spend some quality time with the folks in Columbia County, Florida, as a Category 4 hurricane hit. I spent 3 days in their 911 center, had a blast. But what was happening is there was kind of a disconnect in the communication between the folks that were out in the field responding and calling back into dispatch, letting them know what the damage assessment was while they were still handling a whole bunch of emergencies. So we got to come up with some creative ways for the officers to notify someone else that was sitting in the EOC from the police side versus dispatch. And then they put some crime scene tape on whatever the situation was, whether it was a tree down, et cetera, and was able to mitigate any further communications into the 911 center. So that was fun. And then recovery planning initiatives. Initiating initial discussions and planning for the transition from the response phase to the recovery phase. This includes consideration for long-term recovery efforts. And again, that's going to include communication as well. And then the recovery phase. So the recovery, it switches to recovery when we are restoring and reconstructing the community and its infrastructure after that disaster, returning the community back to normal or improved state is a very long process, especially if it was a major event. The key activities here: assessing the extent of the damage and identifying recovery needs. And again, that piece was also in the response piece. But again, read the question, try to find something identifying which one it is in what piece of that process. Implementing long-term rebuilding plans. Are we going to rebuild? Or maybe we're not even going to rebuild in this area. Providing financial assistance and support to the affected individuals and businesses, enhancing community resilience and to future disasters, reviewing and updating policies and regulations based on lessons learned. So I'm going to assume that Columbia County may take that piece of information moving forward and say, hey, if this happens again, we're going to make sure that the person in the EOC is the one getting notified of trees down that need to be taken care of later, and identifying which ones have already been called in. Reviewing and we just did that. And then monitoring and evaluating the recovery process. So damage assessment, more specifically, conducting a comprehensive assessment to determine the extent of the damage to infrastructure, homes, and the environment. This assessment informs recovery planning and includes recovery planning and resource allocation. The infrastructure repair and reconstruction, initiating projects to repair or rebuild damaged infrastructure, including roads, bridges, utilities, and public buildings. This aims to restore essential services and improve community resilience. Housing and recovery, implementing programs to address housing needs for individuals and families that have been displaced or left homeless by the disaster. This may include temporary shelters, rebuilding homes, or providing housing assistance. And then the economic recovery, supporting businesses affected by the disaster through financial assistance, low interest loans and grants, and economic recovery efforts that focus on reviving local economies and employment opportunities. Additional parts of the recovery process: environmental restoration, implementing initiatives to restore and rehabilitate the natural environment, such as reforestation, shoreline protection, and hazardous material cleanup. Healthcare service restoration, reestablishing and enhancing healthcare services to meet the increased demand for medical care resulting from the disaster. That might be bringing in travel nurses, doctors, etc., to kind of like a TERT thing, right? But in the hospital. And this includes rebuilding damaged healthcare facilities and ensuring access to essential medical services. And then the last part of the recovery part is education system recovery, restoring and improving educational facilities and services disrupted by the disaster. And this may involve rebuilding schools, providing educational resources, and supporting the students and teachers as necessary. So I know that was a lot of reading and definitions, but that's what you're going to need for this. So I suggest reading through them, figuring out which one goes into which category, and use the chat GPT. I say chibi, it's chat GBT feature. Moving forward, now that you have the access to this tool, if I was studying for the exam, I would go ahead and take my PDF that I send you, copy the information, pop it in that website, put it all in there, and create some quizzes on your own. One of the things that I know is the more I work with this slide deck, the more I work with the book, the more I create slides and training and quizzes and all that, the more the information sticks in my head. So while yes, I will provide some of these for you, you can do it for you too. and one, get to use the tool, see how amazing it is, and then two, learn the information while you're doing those things. So there you go for that. Oh, I thought the education was the last one. The recovery, long-term planning and policy revision, reviewing and updating our policies, regulations, and land use plans to incorporate lessons learned from the disaster. Long-term planning aims to reduce vulnerability to future events. And then monitoring and evaluation of what has happened, what's going forward, continuously monitoring and evaluating the recovery process to assess the effectiveness of interventions, identify areas of improvement, and adjust strategies as needed. So, as we mentioned before, they do mention it in the study guide that recovery and mitigation activities may overlap. And there might be a specific reason they're saying that, but just know that there's a couple other areas that overlap as well. The study manual also indicates that ENP candidates should review the emergency management process as defined by FEMA, and they have listed these two websites. I would highly recommend, if you have not done so yet, as does the study guide, if you haven't taken the NIMS courses on those websites, I recommend it, and especially IS 100, IS 200, and IS 700B. So the manual indicates that these are beneficial to understanding the knowledge of emergency management and incident command. So, and you should have it anyway if you're kind of working in a 911 center. It's good to have that information. And then we're going to continue on to the categories of service disruption. I hope my tips and tricks help you here. But first, I want to say thank you to Kim Culp of Larimer Emergency Telephone Authority in Colorado, LETA. She is wicked smart when it comes to this stuff. They've had a few scenarios and situations that that fell into many of these categories. So I had a conversation with her before the last study group and have permission to use some of her information. I did recreate some of the slides to be, Tracy-fied. But nonetheless, she was super helpful in helping me kind of have an understanding of this. And now I can go ahead and share it on to you. So as an FYI, as I've mentioned before, anytime I notice something in the study manual that is different or could stump you, because it stumped me. So if it stumped me, it might stump you. So I'm just going to point it out. So in this section that has the loss or disruption of services, it has a list at the beginning. And that list is everything in the bullets, the main set of bullets. But the two that are starred, the first two do not match the list in the definitions section. So I have made note and I put it on my little document that will go over to the folks at NINA to say they should be titled the same thing, right? So while they're not too far off, it's just something that can confuse folks like me, and I'd rather it not be confusing. So on the main list, it says full or partial loss of service to the PSAP, but in the definition section, it refers to it as just loss of service to PSAP. And then the next one, loss of PSAP facility, it just says loss of PSAP. And while it may not be that different or difficult for anybody else, I just think consistency is good when it comes to things like this. So there we go. And then here are my creative little drawings. But I do want, before we jump in, I just want to give you a reminder, and it does give the reminder in the beginning of this section in the manual as well, referring to that end office. Okay. So if you remember in the terminology from previous sessions, we have our central office and end office. And an end office is in fact a central office It's just the end point to something. So as you can see, the central office, it can go off to the PSAP, it can go off to another PSAP, and it can go back. It can go back and forth to the end office. But if you look at the end office, it's actually the end point to the place that is making the phone call. So it's like a demarcation point. There's going to be a stop there. It's only going to go to one more location. And then that's where that particular piece ends. So just keep that in mind. I just want to identify these terms right here. So isolation versus loss. When you go into the study manual, or you just use these here, you're going to hear things like isolation of the end office, loss of the end office, or isolation of the PSAP, loss of the PSAP. These are the two icons that I'm going to use to indicate those. The isolation is, it's not destroyed, but you just can't get there from here, right? So think of an island. I'm isolated out on an island. The island's not destroyed, it's there. We just may have to go around or come up with an alternate route to get out there. The X is, it's damaged, it's destroyed, it has to be fixed. That thing actually has to be fixed. And then service versus facility. So as you'll see when we go through each of these disruptions in service, you'll see that one of them says service and one might say facility. Well, when they're talking about service, they're identifying the service that is actually going to the facility versus the facility itself. So again, while it might be logical for some, for me, it's really important to break it down into these very simple terms, because if we break apart the sentences, then as you read the sentence and ask what it is actually identifying, I can visualize when it says service, it's going to be the service, the wires. And then if it says facility, it's actually going to be the building. Now, with that said, if you go back a couple of weeks, I identified the difference between a facility and facilities. A facility is the building. Facilities might fall under transport facilities, which could be the wires that are going into the facility. But usually that's identified with transport facilities like copper, fiber optic, etc. So a little recap there, and so you can see what we're talking about here. So as it's listed, a full or partial loss of service to the PSAP. So you see there, I have service in quotes, and that is an interruption or break in the communication links causes when an interruption or break in the communication links causes a loss of service to the PSAP. And so that's probably going to be between the central office and the PSAP. This can cause a full or partial loss of service to the PSAP due to a failure in communication equipment or cutting of the telecommunications cable. So you envision that full or partial loss of the service to the PSAP is that last leg from the central office heading to the PSAP, and the service is actually disrupted by damage to the communication link. The loss of PSAP facility, it results when the facility housing the PSAP is destroyed or so severely damaged from natural or man-made disasters that the PSAP cannot safely continue its operations. This can also result from the threat of such action or from an event that requires evacuation. So loss of the PSAP means the PSAP is not functional. We can't be in the PSAP and functioning in this PSAP facility. And then isolation of the central office. If you notice the little circles there, one on either side, it's basically saying that the central office is on an island, just like an island would be, isolated on the island. It may not be destroyed, but you just can't get there from here. Okay. So the isolation of the central office occurs when the links between the central office serving a PSAP and the remainder of the communications network are interrupted. Only calls from within the area served by the affected central office can be completed. So if you think about the terminal isolation of the central office, if you're taking the exam, isolation of the central office, you close your eyes, you picture the central office being an island. Can't get there from here. Okay, so there's a problem in the links between anything else, the network, the PSAP, etc. Isolation of the end office. This occurs when the end office that feeds the 911 system has its communication links to the tandem switch or selective router that's broken. In this case, calls from the area served by the end office will not reach the PSAP. Telecommunicators, now watch what happens. So telecommunicators must be relocated to the isolated end office to answer 911 calls. Will that happen? Probably not. Could it happen? Yeah, I could pick up my people, go to the end office, plop my butt down. If the equipment was there, that call, the 911 call is coming from here. It's going to hit this end office first, but it can't go any further. It can't go any further here because this is isolated. There's an issue here. So now the end office is isolated away from the rest of the network. Okay. So if the telecommunicator does happen to move here, there is not going to be any anti-alley that comes in with this particular call. Why? Because it's not reaching the selective router, which is sending it to the PSAP, which is now parsing out the phone number, which is now going back to the database to get that information to bring it back into the PSAP. So isolation of the end office is over there all by itself, away from the rest of the network. So hopefully that helps. Isolation of the central office. That picture is going to be on the next screen because I had to add a little bit to it. Isolation of the central office. Again, close your eyes. Imagine that central office on an island all by itself. It can't be reached over here. Can't be reached over here. It occurs when the links between the central office and the serving PSAP and the remainder of the communications network are interrupted. In this case, only calls from within the central area can be redirected to a 7-digit number at the PSAP that operates from the isolated central office. The calls will not route through the tandem switch or the selective router, which is one and the same, and it will not have any alley for the same reasons as we discussed before. If your 911 system contains more than one end office, 911 calls from outside the central office serving the PSAP will not be completed as expected. They will be rerouted according to your contingency routing plan. So this goes back to when we talked about, where did it go? Okay, so here's our phone call, and then here is our isolated central office away from the PSAP. And then the actual loss of the central office occurs when the communication equipment located in the central office fails because of a malfunction, water damage, fire, or other causes within the central office. All phone service, including 911 to the area served by the central office, is lost. In this situation, 911 calls must be redirected to the backup PSAP. And so this is the one that I added a little bit to. A couple of things here. So loss of the central office. So if that central office is lost, we have a situation here, calls cannot get here. The call gets placed. It goes to the end office. It knows that it can't get here. It's going to use alternate routing. If you remember when we talked about alternate routing versus default routing is when it goes somewhere because it doesn't know where to go and it defaults somewhere that was identified. Alternate routing is this call knows exactly where it's supposed to be going, but it just can't get there. So we have a loss of the central office. So this is when it's going to engage in alternate routing and send it to the backup PSAP. Loss of tandem switch or selective router, again, one and the same. They're just called different things in different places and reasons, but it results in the loss of call routing and ANI service. Equipment failure or some catastrophic incident such as fire or damage to the host can cause a loss of the tandem or selective router. This is why some 911 systems have dual geographically diverse selective routers capable of carrying the full load. So if one of the selective routers is down, then the other one can pick it back up. So here we have a loss of the tandem switch or the selective router. So chances are you're going to have, if you have loss of the tandem switch or selective router, it may just be a functional issue there, or there's actual situation in the central office as well. And then loss of database management systems, loss of the database management system, DBMS, know that acronym, can result from the failure of any of the computers that are serving the system or damage to the building that is housing the facility. I don't have any pictures for this. Basically, it's a database management system. You know what a database management system is. Usually it's a computer or it's going to be the facility that houses that computer. And what's not going to happen is we are not going to be able to get up-to-date alley information if that loss of the database exists. And then the definition of an alley node is a network node sits at the point of the 911 network where it can receive, store, or create information. It transmits data to communicate with other nodes in the network. And if we have a loss of that node, it is very similar to the database loss. It basically just doesn't function. And again, you're not going to get back any type of alley information. So it can result from a failure of any of the computers serving the system or damage to the building that is housing those nodes. Additionally, interruption of data links between the alley nodes and the PSAP results in the ability for the ANI to be parsed out, packaged up, and sent to the alley database for a query capability. So the alley information is not going to be coming back. The end result may be loss of alley being available to the PSAPs. Okay, and this is why we have two geographically diverse alley circuits from geographically diverse alley nodes. So there you go. So if nobody has any questions, we will wrap up today. I will get this out, recorded out as soon as possible. I just need to move over the little pop quiz thing that I want to do. And I think I'm going to add a few more and see how it works out. But there we have it. Happy Friday. Go get yourselves ready for whatever it is that's coming in the next couple of weeks. And I'm going to go love on a grandbaby. So until next time, heroes, stay safe, stay strong, stay here. We need you. There's my contact information. If you should need to contact me, you can scan that QR code real quick. And in the lower right-hand corner is the On Scene First Safety Net group, where it is a very safe place for mental health and wellness for first responders. So I appreciate you. Until next time, heroes.